I heard a statistic that diabetics make around 180 more decisions than the average person. With that, you need help. You need accommodations.
And when we need a little extra help because of our diabetes or because of whatever other medical condition that we have, we should not be penalized for that. An accommodation under the ADA is actually just a modification of a policy or practice so that you as an individual with a disability has a level playing field. There will be times that likely the diabetes is going to interfere with your ability to be able to access your educational program, to access the workplace, to be able to access places of public events. Any sort of institution is looking for. Is your requested accommodation necessary, reasonable, and appropriate based upon what your condition is?
And if it's reasonable, it's something that's workable and makes sense and that can be done in a practical way, then the school or the employer or whoever else has to provide it.
Take your knowledge that this is a federal civil right and that you have the right to be able to access your education and the workplace and goods and services.
When you submit accommodations to your university, you're usually going through the Office of Accessibility Services. Somebody from that office will then ask you for documentation, proof of your disability. For me, going into the Office of Accessibility Services, I'm nervous. I don't know what to say. I'm new to type 1 diabetes in a way still. So, going into the office, I found a tremendous amount of support.
Part of the reason why my parents were so comfortable with me moving 1,000 miles across the country was at the University of Minnesota. We have a very, very, very strong initiative to protect the rights of students with disabilities.
Once you've established what the plan is with that coordinator at the central office, now make sure you have a copy of the plan and that you're providing it to the right people. That might be your classroom teacher or someone else who is going to be observing or being around when you are accessing those accommodations. They need to be aware of it too.
I was very upfront when I got to a class with a new professor and I have to use my phone. This is my insulin pump. You can't call me out, basically.
Any job that you apply for, you'll see a job description and it will list all the things that they expect the person in that position to do. Those are generally the essential functions of the job. I always remind people when they say, can you do the job? That includes with the accommodations.
When we move over into workplace accommodations, I think that sometimes employees can feel that they'd be too much to be able to ask their employer for an accommodation. One of the key things, whether you're in the employment context or whether you're in the educational context, is that accommodations are not retroactive. As an employee, you may have already had a performance-related issue, and now the employer is trying to penalize you for that. But deep inside, you knew the reason why that was happening was because of a diabetes-related issue. If you had registered with your HR office, if you had gone through that reasonable accommodation process, they may be able to help you with that. And sort of not penalize you for that.
When to disclose you have diabetes. I encourage people to do it and to share whatever they're comfortable sharing and enough to get the accommodations. It's not something that you need to talk about in a job interview. You can, you're allowed to. The employer is not allowed to ask about it, so you shouldn't feel any pressure to disclose. Now, once you have an offer or once you're employed, then you can have a conversation of, okay, so I'm here, I'm ready to be a successful team member. Now I need some of these accommodations, and here's why. It doesn't mean that you have to disclose all your medical records. That's not allowed, and it's not necessary. It's only going to be medical information that's relevant to those accommodations.
There are a million reasons why we may not want to share with others that we're living with diabetes. There's stigma that exists in our communities. There are stigmas that exist in the workplace. There are stigmas that exist in schools, even that exist within the diabetes universe.
When you realize that you are not the only one and that there's a community out there in the world that is most likely with individuals in it that is most likely going through the same things that you are going through.
I find a lot of support and a lot of advice from other people with type 1 that I know.
And there are even tons of online resources out there that have lists of types of accommodations to consider.
If you request accommodations and are denied, we always recommend that you evaluate how reasonable your request was and also evaluate the reason for the denial. In the event that request has put an undue burden on the entity from whom you've asked it, then you need to consider how you might meet them in the middle. In the event that you receive a response that will not accommodate your needs, then you should absolutely take a look at the Americans with Disabilities Act and best understand if you have been violated by the person who has denied your accommodations. And from there, there's always recourse.
So whether that's filing a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights or utilizing sort of an internal grievance process at your university or your college, or filing a complaint with the EEOC if you feel like that you have, suffered disability discrimination at work due to diabetes.
They have investigators and lawyers who can both provide guidance and even look into your case. And in some cases, they may even provide some representation.
The Diabetes Patient Advocacy Coalition exists to help people with diabetes. We are primarily focused on policy, but we understand the law when it comes to the rights of people with diabetes. Additionally, the American Diabetes Association has a tremendous advocacy department, and you can always call them and they will help you understand your rights and help arm you with what you need to have the next conversation about your accommodations.
The goal is always to resolve things so you can get back to work.
It really starts with that first step of making the ask. My very greatest recommendation is to bring your confidence with that ask.
Eradicate that shame. Hold your head up high. It's hard enough that we have to have difficult experiences from time to time, but how you treat yourself is how other people will treat you.
Once you kind of settle into that meeting, all in all, the person on the other side of that table just wants to help.